Well, hello and good afternoon. I'm Tanya Saunders, and I'm the owner and operator of Mid-Tier Advocacy. I'm going to turn on my webcam so that you can see me. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're able to join us today. Again, I am the founder and chairman of Mid-Tier Advocacy, and I'm also your host. So welcome to our webinar on PPE opportunities and challenges. A brief overview of what you need to know about the Biden executive order, as well as Buy American. We're going to have some very good presenters today with us. We have Mi-Jeong Hibbets with the Global Chamber of Commerce. We also have our board member and counsel, Attorney Jerry Miles. Today, on March 11th, I have to state one point. It marks a milestone in this devastating global pandemic. In fact, March 11th is the anniversary, 1-year anniversary, when the World Health Organization officially declared that COVID-19 was a global pandemic. In the United States, where state and local labs couldn't test for the virus, as well as making matters worse, there just wasn't enough PPE for medical personnel, as we all know too painfully well. In today's webinar, however, we're going to hear from our guests on the status of the PPE supply chain and business compliance in the federal marketplace for suppliers. We have come a long way. We still have a ways to go. Before we begin, just a note of housekeeping. You will be and remain on mute with your cameras off during our presentation. We will answer questions at the end, provided there's time. And also, feel free to use our chat during the session to ask the presenters questions. And one small disclaimer, the information provided is for the purpose of this webinar, and it's not intended to be used as legal advice, even though we have an attorney who will be sharing information with you. By the way, March is Women's History Month. And this is a month that's set aside commemorating and encouraging the study, observance, and celebration of the vital role of women in American history. And today we're starting off the March Business Insider webinar series with our featured guest speaker in honor of Women's History Month, Ms. Mi-Jeong Hibbets with the Global Chamber of Commerce. I get my tongue tied all the time, so excuse me for that, Mi-Jeong. During the entire month of March, we will host amazing women who are making history today. Be sure to sit in. You don't want to miss any of these upcoming events. A little brief mention about Mid-Tier Advocacy. We are a 501c3 organization. We're rapidly growing, and we represent government contracting firms across the country. We exist to help small and advanced and or mid-sized contractors grow and be sustainable over time. We are going to begin our slideshow starting now. I'm going to turn off my webcam. Excellent. All right, while we're going through the beginning of the slide presentation, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Mi-Jeong Hibbets. She's an international business and marketing expert with extensive expertise in the areas of international trade, marketing, advertising, journalism, media, finance, and the U.S. government. Mi-Jeong is currently the executive director of the Global Chamber of Commerce, Baltimore, Washington region. This is an organization that helps members in 525 metro areas worldwide and growing bridge new global business opportunities. Mi Zhang is also president of Robert and William LLC, an international trade and marketing consulting firm located in Maryland, where she brings decades of broad working experience in the private and public sectors in the US and overseas. Her services focus on assisting companies engaging in cross-border trade between the US and Asia by providing strategic guidance and practical know-how, including providing leads and contacts related to market entry, development, and expansion strategy. We welcome Mi Zhang.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Tanya, for inviting me over to speak today at one of the mid-tier Advocacy's Business Insider webinar series. I'm very honored and humbled to have this opportunity to speak, especially this Women's Month, to celebrate and honor all the great women out there and their achievement in this world. I'm also honored to be here with another speaker, Jerry Miles, who is a very highly regarded attorney. So before I talk anything about PPE, let me first introduce the Global Chamber to all of you and explain how we help small business and medium-sized business, regardless of industries that they are in. Next. Shall I move to the next slide? Yeah, this is the building where the headquarters of Global Chamber is located. It's actually in sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. It was founded 5 years ago by CEO Doug Brunke. And I must say there are a lot of Chamber of Commerce doing great work helping businesses. But the Global Chamber is very unique in that it actually focuses on helping companies grow cross-border commerce and trade and investment. So as Tanya briefly mentioned, we have presence in 525 metro regions in 195 countries all around the world. And Baltimore and Washington, D.C., where I am the executive director for, is actually one metro serving members in the state of Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Northern Virginia areas. Let's move to next. So presence in 525 metro, it means we are global and we are everywhere. And with this vast business network, we help members to reach new markets beyond where they are just currently operating, and find the contacts and access to resources and talents in those new markets that they never been. Members will have opportunities to increase exposure and visibility of their products and services and get more information on those new markets as well. But I think the most important value proposition that the Global Chamber can provide is trust. So for example, when I look for making really the contacts in Nigeria, I will go to the executive director in Nigeria, who is well connected and well regarded in that community and that region. And I trust the information and the referrals provided by them because there is a certain level of trust built because we worked together as a member of the Global Chamber. Next. So this is the map of our metros around the globe, but I think it needs to be a little bit more updated with the newly added chapters. Next. So how we help? We use artificial intelligence to match businesses with prospects. We provide warm intros, not cold intros, to target clients and partners. And we do have numerous webinars that addresses really essential issues for doing business globally. The reason why we call them globinars is because the members actually from all around the globe are participating in this type of webinars. And then we provide workshops and events and helpful resources for members' growth in their global journey. Next. So now let's move to the topic of PPE. First, I must say that I'm not a really technical PPE expert and certainly not a medical expert nor a scientist who can talk a lot about COVID-19 and PPE. However, I have worked with manufacturers and suppliers and distributors of PPE and other medical devices, such as testing kits from South Korea. And I'm also learning every day from the members of the Global Chamber who are involved in PPE domestically as well as globally. So based on this experience, I will speak more from a business perspective, and some of my points might be very obvious and some may not be, but I want to provide changing or unchanging this landscape of a PPE industry, and thus listeners can identify opportunities and challenges for themselves. Next. So then what is PPE? Well, we all know by now what they are, but if you think back March of last year, people didn't even know what the word PPE stands for, except healthcare professionals. As you can see here, there are three different ways the word PPE is used. PPE, FDA approved PPE, and vetted PPE. And this information is actually from HIDA, H-I-D-A, Health Industry Distributors Association's PPE Market Report 2020. So PPEs are the personal protective equipment such as gloves and medical masks, goggles, face shield, and medical gowns that healthcare providers rely on, right, to protect themselves from getting infected while they're treating patients every day. And FDA PPA, they are the PPE that meet FDA regulations and quality standard. So all PPEs, such as surgical masks and N90 respirators and medical gloves and medical gowns that are used in medical setting in the United States, they have to be FDA approved. And there are vetted PPE. These are the ones produced by manufacturers who can demonstrate that their product meets FDA standard. So as a distributor, it's important that you must vet the manufacturer to make sure that is the really case. And then we'll talk about the importance of vetting and the verification later on. Next. Well, I will simply skip this supply chain slide as they are somewhat straightforward, and then move to the PPE shortage that we experienced 2020. So, well, you must remember a photo of a nurse in a hospital, wearing a garbage bag because the hospital didn't have enough medical gowns for their healthcare workers. What were the reasons for such a terrible PPE shortage, and how come our supply chain was so broken? And I think understanding the PPE supply and demand from a global perspective will help us to understand this challenge of the challenges that the PPE industries have been facing. And then in fact, that's what new administration is trying to address with a series of new executive orders. So if you look at the biggest reason is quite obvious and simple, but it was because we in the United States don't manufacture PPE as much. And in fact, during the last 40 years, the manufacturing basis of PPE has been just concentrated in Asia, specifically in China. But when COVID broke out in Asia, several countries, major countries producing PPE, they went through shutdowns and restrictions. And then the demand for the United States just surged unimaginable, right? Quantity. Just the demand was just coming from everywhere, including not just the traditional, but non-traditional consumers like local government and businesses and general public. So altogether, it was just a perfect storm. Next. One up. There we go. This map shows the example of a global supply chain concentration in Asia. And this case is the protective suits. It's part of PPE in 2018. Actually, it's a pre-COVID time. I must say the source of this information is from ADB's global shortage of PPE amid COVID-19 April 22. So the yellow arrow here represent export from Asia. And the thickness of the yellow arrow represent the amount of the product imported. As you can see, the biggest importer of the Chinese protective suit was indeed the United States. You see that the thickest arrow goes from PRC to the United States. And next. And another data shows how much PPE import has had increased from 2019 to 2020. ITA, International Trade Administration's, the Office of Textile Apparel's data shows that PPE import had jumped by 320.5% from 2019 to 22. That is from $4.8 billion to $20 billion. Next. So then 1 year later, how the supply and the demand landscape will change this year and then the after. I think the promising thing is that really the average number of daily new cases has recently dropped a lot. The daily new cases on March 7, as you can see on this slide, was 40,336. And it was huge decrease from January when we saw the peak. And next. Similarly, COVID hospitalization number is also continuing to fall from the peak in January as well. And so January 132,474 to as of February 14 of this year, 6722. It's it shows a continuous the improve. And as the numbers, COVID numbers keep improving, we might think that the demand for PPE will dramatically diminish soon here. That may be the case, but experts tend to be a little bit more cautious, and they agree we would not have, that extreme shortage situation like 22 with this trend, but the demand for the PPE will remain high. At least for some years. There are a lot of talk about, vaccine, the speed of vaccine, how it really folding out, and then also there are some vaccine hesitancies, and even after people get vaccinated, there's a need for the PPE. So those are the the expert assessment. But if we move to the next slide. So somewhat surprisingly, though, the PPE shortage this year is still being reported, even as of January this year, according to a nationwide nonprofit organization called Get Us PPE. They maintain the largest non-government database of PPE shortages in the United States, and then publish PPE shortage index every month. And according to their January report, the PPE request increased by 48% between December 22 and January 2021. They received more than 90 million requests, while only 7.3 million PPEs were delivered. But in January, I mean, we saw the extraordinary. So the shortage picture might change in the coming months, but the key takeaways are the healthcare workers were still reusing, N95 mask and nitrile gloves because of the shortage, and PPE pricing was also really high compared to pre-COVID time. So for example, the average cost for a single N90 mask was up by 1,300% from 40 cents pre-COVID to $4 to $7 these days. Actually, you can find a little bit lower pricing, even $2 to $3 range that I've seen. And the average cost for a pair of nitrile gloves also was up by 600% from 5 cents pre-COVID to 30 to 40 cents after COVID. Let's move to the next. So then now let's look at the series of the new administration's strategic response to COVID-19, as these will impact on PPE market environment. So President Biden has signed more than 10 executive orders on his first 2 days in his office, and some of them are directly related to addressing shortage of PPE, including, in this case, testing issues as well. Mask mandates on federal property and in an airport and international flight, train, to ensure travel safety. There was the first one he signed, and I think especially the US-bound travelers must get tested no more than 3 days before flying, and have to bring the written and electronic proof of the testing result. And President Biden also enacted DPA, Defense Production Act, to increase the production of PPE and testing and other critical products domestically. He also signed a Buy American executive order for federal government procurement to increase the purchase of products made in the United States. This will be looked at more detail later from policy, the perspective by Jerry. And one thing that stands out from a series of these COVID-19 strategy by the administration is creating the pandemic testing board in order to scale up COVID-19 tests. It really recognized the importance of broad mass testing to identify people who are positive with COVID, even without symptoms, and then quickly isolate so that the virus doesn't spread in community and workplace and schools and other places. And next. And reopening school, this is not an order, but President Biden has pledged to reopen most schools for in-person instruction by May. And I believe as more schools open, products help clean air and sanitize, and products such as medical grade mask, COVID-19 testing will continue to be sought after. Next. Here, I just want to briefly just switch our focus briefly from PPE to one testing that I think might see some substantial demand increase as our economy continues to open. It is a testing called pooled testing, and this saliva swab pooled PCR testing could be a cost-effective solution when conducting screening and a surveillance test at school or workplaces or mass gathering like sports in high transmission area as our economy continue to open up. And next. Well, this diagram by the USA Today shows how it works. Basically, instead of testing each individual, people are broken up into groups, and the groups of 5 people is tested at once all together, and then the result of the combined samples from these groups are checked. So if it is negative, you don't have to worry about it, but if it is positive, then individuals in that group are tested again to find which one is a positive case and then isolate. So that way, tests can be done much more faster, and also you can save the cost by testing groups, not by individual. And next. Now moving back to PPE opportunities and challenges. Simply from a just the demand perspective, PPE demand will be still there for some time. And as I shown earlier, our frontline workers are still in great need of critical gears. Especially FDA approved N95 and nitrile gloves are still hard to find and expensive, and a lot of them are on back order. So I wouldn't just close businesses with an anticipation that numbers improving here, so the demand will not be there. And Buy American order in federal procurement, I think that is definitely good news for US-based PPE manufacturers. Since last month, many companies and even our member companies of Global Chamber have pivoted to make PPE to meet skyrocketing demand here in the US. And these companies will find more opportunities to obtain government contract under the Buy American requirement. And similarly, the DPA will incentivize manufacturers to produce more PPE and other critical COVID products. And again, I think the expanding test is a good opportunity as well for manufacturers and other suppliers in this space. More, faster and a more accurate and a more convenient and cost-saving diagnostic technology will continuously be rewarded. And for example, you may have heard an Australian company, Allum, they manufacture at-home over-the-counter, the coronavirus testing kits. They got $230 million contract from the U.S. government, and this is not a U.S. domestic company, but Allum received the first FDA EUA for its kind, the at-home rapid testing kits. But at the same time, I think there are challenges associated with the Buy American order. This requirement would really create opportunity for some contractors for sure, but it would hurt those who need to source, from other countries, especially some small and mid-sized businesses. They were forced to turn to restricted this domestic supply chain, which may raise their cost, and so they may be competitively really priced out of the contracts or winning the bids. And another challenge would be the availability, right? In many cases, there is not really sufficient domestic manufacturing capacity to supply all of what the government really needs. So meeting this requirement means the available products that the government could buy could be reduced, and also some cases, procurement project could be delayed as well. And then sustainability issues. I spoke with a member who is a medical device supplier in Texas, and she has also been providing these PPEs to state and other local government. She would really, the welcome and wanted to find the opportunity to the federal procurement opportunities, but she is hesitant to making those substantial investment in capital and workforce, because when the contract really runs out or demand diminish, the people that she hired and have to be let go, and there's a lot of she will be very not really favorable financial position. So without really clear sustainability path forward, she said she would be really hesitant to jump on this the opportunities. And then there is an issue, how to determine American product, how much of a component has to be in to be considered as a American product. So for this, I believe we will have to wait until more policies have to come out. And next. Well, meanwhile, it's not really related to exactly the executive orders, but I want to mention another major issues in PPE space, that is counterfeit, PPEs. We might have seen this footage on TV a few weeks ago. FBI in New York area, raided a warehouse and discovered millions of counterfeited N95 masks. There are about 6,000 suspected victims in at least 12 states, including hospitals and medical facilities and others. It is a very pervasive issue and difficult to distinguish and continue to be a major issue. So as a contractor or distributor, you really must do due diligence and vet your source of supply before making any purchase, the commitment. And next. And when it comes to verification, here are some steps that we recommend. These are very important steps, but easily just overlooked when we are caught up with just finding and supplying only low-cost PPE and trying to meet just literally just impossible delivery time schedule. And so I urge anybody like in this supply chain really to make sure to check their suppliers, source of suppliers, their sales history and production, and in R&D and their tax compliance, quality control, and importantly, their reputation, such as really customer reviews and reference reviews. And then next. So lastly, I want to just talk about a lot of really big, broad pictures, but lastly, I want to just wrap up, my talk, how the Global Chamber really can help by connecting legitimate buyers with really reliable and trusted PPE supply sources. We have PPE Trusted Sourcing Program, which is for our members around the world, sourcing PPE and medical device products. And through our trusted members and members referrals, we connect suppliers and buyers. And we have members who are, gloves suppliers in Malaysia, and medical gown suppliers in Vietnam, and testing kit suppliers in South Korea, and mask producers in India, and list can go on. So if you have procurement needs for the PPE and need some, the trusted, really the network, please reach out to us, and as we can connect the businesses who we believe are trustworthy, and at least who can give some accurate and honest information, what can be done and what cannot be done for you. So with that, I conclude my talk here, and really appreciate for listening and the opportunity to speak briefly, talk about global chamber and then PPE from a business perspective. And I hope this was just somewhat helpful to you. And last announcement, we have a member organization, Korea Innovation Center, based in Northern Virginia, and they would like to donate non-contact infrared thermometer to any school that are opening, or workplaces or clinics who might find this product useful. It's great for checking temperatures of students or employees or the patients without touching. It's untagged technology, and 30 units available. So if anybody knows those organizations who need them, please contact us. Then we'd love to get the donation to you. So thank you very much. Here's my information, and again, thank you for the opportunity to share my talk.
Mijong, thank you so much for all of the information. It is invaluable as we continue to try and find ways of dealing with this global pandemic. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, I believe, but we're clearly not at the end just yet. And our next presenter, a number of you are already very familiar with. And what I want to share prior to having Jerry speak to us, this is just a little summation. And I also noticed that we do have a few questions, which I'm going to try to get to because I think Jerry is probably extremely knowledgeable in the area and can answer them from his legal standpoint. So in summation, President Joe Biden has moved through executive action to establish a pandemic testing board, which you heard about, to identify issues and help implement testing solutions, direct actions to address the cost of COVID-19 testing, establish a public health workforce plan. All of these are going to be very important as you continue with your proposals and trying to address some of these supply needs. Establish a COVID-19 health equity task force. Identify actions to ensure equitable response, including those to address vaccine hesitancy, which means advertisements. If you're in the public relations business, there will be some opportunities there for you. Require an immediate inventory of response supplies and identify areas of need. Direct the use of Defense Production Act to address the shortages. And he has also, through executive order, enhanced COVID-19 data collection, which will strengthen the public health infrastructure. So again, as we all know in federal procurement, those are opportunities. So with that being said, Jerry Alfonso Miles is the managing principal of Deal Services. He's works with government contractors. He's highly experienced with both staff attorney experience, domestic and abroad, for a large government contractor that substantially supported the nation and the U.S. warfighter in relation to wartime. Mr. Miles also has extensive experience in relation to assisting government contractors with emergency and disaster relief considerations. He's honored to be of support service to government contractors and grantees who are assisting the federal and other government entities in protecting us, the United States, against the impact of coronavirus. And with that being said, I introduce now to you Jerry Miles.
Well, certainly. What an introduction. Thank you very much for that. And, what I would say is now is certainly a time of innovation, as Mrs. Hibbets just suggested, innovation to address, an emergent need. This is something that I wouldn't say that I directly do, but I do thank our government contractors as extended arms of the government, who, like KBR, where I started my career as a staff attorney, actually were able to help assist the warfighter. And here the warfighter are certainly those frontline individuals, to include many of my own family members and direct parents who are both doctors on the front lines. With that said, certainly PPE matters to a lot of folks in this nation. And I think that what we're looking at right now is that as of January 25th, 2021, perhaps it's my experience, I'm getting a few gray hairs, but I did predict back in April of last year, when heavily looking at the need for PPE amidst a major demand, that at some point in time, the cross-section between this pandemic and the economic considerations that are being presented to the nation would certainly be something that would result in a targeted focus on how the two interplay, and that would occur on the playing field of the Buy American Act. Certainly, the Build Back Better, economic stimulus and reinvestment plan here is really reminiscent of the 2009 American Recovery and Reinvestment Act during that time of economic concerns. And so what we're seeing here is this administration, through Executive Order 14,005, looking at these circumstances and saying, there are existing laws that we will discuss. There is a need to promote a U.S. industrial base, direct capacity. There's also a need to promote job creation, to support small businesses, and to rely upon large businesses who have a greater production capacity than we might otherwise have had a year ago. Through the Defense Production Act, we've seen heavy encouragement under the former administration of the importance of utilizing the benefit of our government to be able to promote the benefit of public health, welfare, and safety under the circumstances, to include utilization of PPE. So what is this executive order really about? This is not the first pandemic that the United States or other nations have faced. This is not the first emergency circumstances that the United States have faced. The goal of the acts that we'll discuss here is to support products that are made in America. Okay. Now, I always wondered, as I suggested, how the Buy American Act would actually impact the demand issue. Okay, and what would be the implications of the United States utilizing its Made in America laws, its Buy America Act, its TAA, and now this executive order to be able to promote the U.S. industrial base and the benefits of that, while counterbalancing the fact that we are economically interdependent on other major manufacturing nations worldwide. And there could be, because of the executive order 14,005, essentially saying, we understand there's a Buy America Act, but we also understand that there's a Trade Agreements Act that requires us to honor our relationships with other countries with whom we are economically interdependent with or otherwise do business. And so the issue here is, could we be witnessing, compliance with US law, compliance with US international agreements, but heavy emphasis on the US domestic industrial base need to develop jobs, businesses, etc., really being something that could spark trade wars. And despite demands, despite domestic necessities outside of that demand for PPE as a result of this pandemic, this is what we're seeing here. It's sort of an executive order that says, let's go ahead and press federal government buyers to use U.S. domestic end products, particularly when it comes to infrastructure projects, construction, or even PPE. And at the same time, while we're emphasizing that, we're also focusing very heavily on the Trade Agreements Act exceptions for listed countries with whom we regularly do business. And really what we're saying here is, under this executive order, the administration is heavily focused on ensuring compliance as a means of promoting enforcement of the BAA. So ensuring that we are heavily looking at our trade agreements with other listed nations under the Trade Agreements Act and saying, okay, the Buy America Act says you gotta get your domestic end products from the United States. There's a 50% total cost of component rule that we'll discuss that suggests that 50% and that an item, a domestic end item, is created in the United States, and 50% of the component products actually come from the United States, directly sourced from the United States, no subcomponents from other areas. And what we see is actually a concern that the Trade Agreements Acts really need to be applied. We need to observe our agreements with other nations, but at the same time, can we use strict scrutiny and oversight of a new entity called the Made in America Office to actually focus on close reviews of how agencies are run, including the BAA, or Buy American Act of 1933, in their solicitations, but also under what circumstances are those government buyers under heavy demands and needs for PPE. Actually also taking into account the fact that we have to, under certain circumstances, pay homage to the utilization of foreign sourced products that form a basis of components for United States end items. Okay, so the Buy America Act requires federal agencies to buy domestic end items. And just like many of us are familiar with the 50% of the work rule, what can become a very complex area of the law is also a 50% of the total cost of component products rule, which the executive order sort of addresses in a different way by way of recommendation. That we increase that 50% of the total cost of components rule under these circumstances. So the Buy America Act will actually have its own exceptions outside of the fact that we have international trade agreements that are covered by the Trade Agreements Act, and where we've promised other nations we will use their domestic goods and component parts when reciprocally engaging in international trade. One of those exceptions is if it's below the micro purchase threshold, which was last reported upon my review at around 30,000, increased under COVID circumstances, as was the simplified acquisition threshold as well, to suggest that anything under that, under 30,000, we're not going to be considering for the purposes of the Buy American Act. So that doesn't apply. Another question is whether the goods are for use outside of the continental United States, or I may refer to it as a CONUS, OCONUS. When we're looking at that, we're doing a cost-benefit analysis, and we're saying, well, even if it's for our warfighters who are deployed abroad, should we be prioritizing the U.S. economic base, or should we be prioritizing offshore personnel of our Department of Defense and the warfighter? Whether or not there are available goods in the United States is actually going to become also an issue, even though the domestic capacity for developing PPE has increased. Now, the last question, which I think a lot of lawyers would like to work with their clients on when trying to determine, well, can we provide this product at a lower cost somehow? Can we source from other regions, is going to be the public interest exception. So if it's in the public interest to utilize foreign sourced component parts or perhaps even end items, under those circumstances, we'll be looking at the BAA being automatically expressly waived under its own terms, so it won't apply. And when you think about that, there's sort of a balancing act of considerations that were really built into the BAA to say, listen, we understand that there's going to be domestic industrial-based needs, job creation needs, small business development needs amidst crises, pandemics, warfare. And when the lawyer looks at something like a public interest exception, when even my own parents are on a day-to-day basis heavily utilizing PPE, we're going to be saying, we'd like to fight for what is in the best interest of our clients in being able to service that particularly that front end PPE utilizer. When it comes to Executive Order 1405, we're still encouraging the use of domestic source products and component parts within the United States. Again, though, the Made in America office has considerable discretion to make recommendations upon reviews of agencies who are required to report into the MIA to make sure that those agencies are going to be operating in compliance with the applicable TAA waivers that require us to source to countries that we regularly do business with abroad. Okay, so all we're looking at is really just using the executive order as a basis to observe our obligations domestically and abroad, but at the same time as an enhanced screen to make sure that when we're using our TAA waivers to honor our reciprocal trade agreements with listed countries, that we're doing so in a manner that's extremely conservatively close to what the law requires. So the MIA will actually review the agency's request for any sort of TAA waiver, and they will make recommendations to include a recommendation of, well, in quotations, further consideration. Okay. Now, what is a recommendation? Well, for us government contractors and our counsel, we're very well familiar with the concept of a recommendation. The Government Accountability Office in the bid protest context, which I'm about to conclude, the Government Accountability Office in the bid protest context will actually state that really every single protest you've ever done, well, it's not really binding. The GAO has no authority. They make a recommendation, a suggestion, that if politically ignored, and I'm not sure that it regularly is unless there's a law-compliant right to override that recommendation, okay, by an agency. Generally, you'll see that politics between agencies, and now the Made in America office, are so strong that we need not need an order from the Made in America office. We simply need a recommendation. To ensure that agencies are following through, not simply on including the Buy America Act provisions in your RFPs or solicitations, we're going to be looking at a requirement that within 180 days of the executive order, that each agency head file a written report with the Made in America office. So we're almost looking at, over a half-year period at this stage. Not only are we including it, but how are we applying it, and how are we requiring and making sure that government contractors comply with it? Well, many government contractors will know about TINA. TINA. Well, TINA is the Truth in Negotiations Act. Truth in Negotiations Act, TINA. When it comes to TINA, at the date of the handshake on price, as defined by case law, the handshake on price, as of the date of the handshake on price with the federal government under your contract, all representations as to the products that you're utilizing and their cost as of that date must be fast and fixed. You can't tell the United States government that okay, today we are complying, we are going to provide US government end items, and without a modification to your contract, giving you leave away from the BAA, later turn around, whether you knew before you signed that contract, you plan to after you sign that contract, source from a foreign entity. You need to negotiate a waiver. If you plan a foreign entity at a lower price, often this is done, so for example, to source, we'll say to the government, we're going to get it from Virginia, but then we get it from the Far East, because we know some places in the Far East are so highly, have such high expertise at certain things like PPE, more experience, to include SARS-1 with PPE. What we're looking at is we could probably go to them for a potential price job behind the government's back. They signed up to the Virginia's price, we give them a price from the Far East. We take a price from the Far East. The product looks the same. Well, what does TINA say? You're going to jail. You're going to jail. If you misrepresent and do not request a BAA modification because you can't find a part locally for your PPE component, your PPE itself, or otherwise, then you need to make sure that it's known to the government and that it's negotiated that there's an exception, which may trigger MIA or Made in America office review. The failure to do so will land you in jail. And lastly, I would just say that when it comes to what we're looking at is operating within a construct. There was not enough time with the heavy focus on CARES Act, the heavy focus on the most recent economic stimulus passage, that we didn't have time to change the law. So you see this administration using its executive order authority to operate and control how agencies are acting and buying within existing acts like the Buy America Act and the Trade Agreements Act to expedite movement of our government without congressional legislative hands. And so what they're suggesting here is, so long as it doesn't run counter to congressional act at the Buy America Act of 1933 or otherwise, we're looking at an emphasis on increasing that total cost rule, that 50% of the total cost of component parts. Biden and this administration are giving sort of a head nod to the agencies to increase that to 55% of the total cost, which would give you a little bit more leeway. So in closing, I would say that, this is certainly a time where the nation has been pressed. And my biggest concern for clients was that the demand would override focus on cost reasonableness, technical specifications of even masks, compliance with FDA protocols. And now what we're seeing as we've sort of invested in the domestic industrial capacity with regard to PPE, we're seeing a focus on utilizing American parts, components as associated and end items on the main as associated with PPE. Certainly a different time as we continue to answer the call for the nation's needs amidst this pandemic.
Jerry, that was amazing. And also Mi-Jeong, I believe in your presentation, Jerry, you touched upon some of the questions that we had received from our audience, our listeners. One, Mijong, and I think you did as well, regarding quality of the product, which now the main thing is to, again, make sure you're utilizing and vetting your potential partners. And if you don't have the ability to do that on your own, the Global Chamber obviously is there to assist. I did have one question, perhaps one of you may be able to respond. Who are the buyers, and how is it that a contractor can get in front of them? Because they're concerned when they make a contact, they still have to wait, or they're being told by federal agencies, you have to wait for a solicitation. What do you recommend in that regard? And either of you can answer.
What do I, go ahead, Mrs. Hibbets.
Well, I mean, simply I would say you probably have to invest in developing some vendor or supplier relationship ahead of this solicitation coming out. And because a lot of times there's really not much time. I've seen some sort of those proposal. You have to respond by certain time, 2 p.m. That was really not enough of a time, right? And then I have one also member who was doing this gown, made in actually Vietnam, and then putting it here, and then they actually provided to local hospitals, and then they successfully actually placed some government contract as well, not the federal level, but they've been thought about actually purchasing the equipment from China and then made the fabric here in the United States. But well, actually the solicitor government agencies, when they're looking for less than $1 for level 3 medical gown, they can't really compete with that. So first of all, you have to develop the really good vendor relationship, and then see, not just looking for the low pricing, but the quality and the compliance and that and all that, so that you can be really ready to provide the good bid. That's one thing. And I think also from the government side, I don't know, Jerry, there will be some consideration on government side for even pricing wise, they are willing to pay more if it is really the made in the United States versus simply just importing from overseas. So that consideration has to be, I think, discussed.
Well, the Competition and Contracting Act has established a fundamental basis for the entirety of the federal acquisition regulations and purchasing and procurement system in the United States. And the premise there is fair and reasonable pricing. I think that what we're looking at here in a time of stimulus and a need for stimulus is less of a focus on, or as we develop a domestic and industrial base, more of a focus on competitive pricing, okay? Overall best value. There's issues with counterfeiting parts. Yes, major manufacturing countries like China have their own export regulations that were implemented in April 1st of 2020 to apply specifically to PPE exports. But at the same time, we're going to be balancing those factors, okay, those risks, with the exception under the VAA, which might be public interest, and that's what I think we were getting to, which is, what is the public interest? Is it an interest in job creation? Is it an interest in managing pandemic amidst industrial vaccinations developments? These are questions that lawyers will help answer. But I will tell you that the basis for that statement would be fair and reasonable pricing. And we often have best value Cadillac procurements that we balance against, best value. Well, I drove a Chevy Nova, an 87 Nova. I have a 64 Nova. The 87 Nova, my friends in high school didn't like. Okay, so an 87 Nova versus a 2021 Cadillac. And really the question there is, we have a great public interest in investing in America. I won't call it welfare at all, but I will say that there is an interest in investing in America. I don't know if that addressed your question. Tanya, was your question, where were the buyers and how?
Well, yeah, that was part two of the question. I think you both touched upon what is required in order to be successful, right, at being a supplier. And the buyer could be, and I'll just jump in for time constraints here. It's now 1:05, we're slightly over, but both commercial as well as federal agencies, state and local governments. Everyone's buying and will have the need to buy, whether it's private practices, businesses, school systems, as Mijang indicated earlier. These are all going to be required for some time for all of us to remain safe and to open safely. So that's where the relationships come in and trying to establish those. I also want to mention our sponsor for the month of March. I have to do a commercial and I'm happy to do it because I'm very excited that we have this new sponsor on board. Emerging Markets Insurance Group. And there will be a handout that you can also take with you. Designing, implementing, and managing benefit packages at no cost to the employer. That is the new approach to healthcare. And as we, again, try and wind our way through and beyond this pandemic, healthcare is going to be in the forefront. Insurance coverage is going to be also something we're all going to be dealing with, and we want to do it as affordably as possible. But I want to thank my guests today. You both are phenomenal and did a wonderful job. The webinar information will be made available to all of those who registered, whether they were able to attend or not. And we will also, again, provide handout information. So to our presenters, again, thank you. Mid-Tier Advocacy, love to have you come back again because I believe this subject matter is going to be with us for some time. With that, I'll close. Anything else for the good of the order? I believe that's it. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.